Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. The movie I want to talk about today comes from 1949. This is White Heat, starring Jimmy Cagney, Virginia Mayo, Edmund O'Brien, and is directed by Raoul Walsh. And this was a very important movie for Jimmy Cagney. This was his return to Warner Brothers, where he had started out. And in the early 40s, he went into independent production with his brother. I think they made 4 movies, and none of them did well. And Warner Brothers needed a hit, and they lured Cagney back with the deal where he would make 3 movies for Warner Brothers, and they would support him in 3 movies of his own independent company. So getting Cagney back was a coup, and how are you going to use Cagney? Well, you're going to make a gangster film. That's what the audiences wanted. And Warner Brothers really promoted the fact that Cagney was back and that Cagney was going to be badder than ever as a gangster. And he certainly is here because he's playing an outright psychopathic gangster in White Heat. Public Heat, I guess he was psychopathic in that too, but he was very young. And in Angels with Dirty Faces, his gangster goes to the gallows, crying and showing his cowardice as a ruse, as a favor to Pat O'Brien, playing a priest whose juvenile delinquent teenagers that are in his care worship Cagney the gangster in that film. And then, of course, they are very upset when they learn that he isn't going to the gallows bravely. And then Roaring Twenties, also directed by Raoul Walsh. I talked about this movie, I think last year or earlier this year, and that there was a softer side to Cagney in that film, but nevertheless a gangster. But here he is full-blown gangster, and he's badder than ever. And I read a New York Times review by Bosley Crowther, and he mentions that in his reviews, mostly positive review, as White Heat was a big, both critical and commercial hit. And that Warner Brothers does deliver, so they realized it at the time. Cagney brings all his energy. He's one of the most energetic movie actors of all time. He's 51, so he's playing a middle-aged psychopathic gangster here. But his movement, he was a dancer. He won his Oscar earlier in the decade for Yankee Doodle Dandy, where he danced and sang. He was a hooper at heart, but he was a gangster in the public's mind. And the film has a lot of it. Right from the opening sequence, we would get a train robbery. There's very quick editing in this. When I was listening to the commentary, I really noticed, this was the Warner Brothers style, I really noticed how quick all these shots were. The editing was just, it's almost like modern editing everywhere, all at once movie. And I was watching a TV detective show set in the Italian shoreline, and all drones, and every shot, I know it's hardly any shots more than 5 seconds. Well, you can go back to Warner Brothers and you'll see their house style. They didn't want the audience to be bored either, and this would be, it would be, if nothing else, a very sensory experience for audiences. And the difference here too is we have the influence of Freud on gangsterism, which came through a lot of films, but most probably film noir films of the late 40s and early 50s. Here, most explicitly here, because Cagney playing Cody Jarrett is a mama's boy. His mom in the movie is sort of modeled after the gangster Ma Barker. And he suffers from terrible headaches, Cody does. He's the leader of his gang, and he has to run when he gets these headaches so he doesn't appear weak, because he has a rival in his gang. And he runs to his mother. There's a great shot where Jimmy Cagney is sitting on his mother's lap, and she is cradling him in her arms. We even get a dissolve where we see Cagney and then slowly it dissolves into Cagney's face dissolves into his mother's face. And the movie has some very famous scenes, and probably the most famous is when Cagney is in prison. He's serving a bogus stretch, a short stretch in prison to provide him an alibi for the train robbery that we see in the beginning. Well, I couldn't have done that train robbery because I was committing this crime. And the authorities, the FBI and the local authorities go along with the ruse because they want to put a mole into prison with him, because they want to find out who is Mr. Big and who is coordinating, because Cagney is basically an independent gangster. He's not part of the mob per se, but he does have a man who launders the money, sets up the robbery schemes. So the FBI puts a mole and to try to find out who this head gangster is. But Cagney learns some bad news, and they're in prison. They're in the famous scene is they're in this big prison cafeteria, loads of extras, tables. We get a big, great wide shot, and Cagney gets the bad news. He goes absolutely berserk, and he runs down the table screaming and knocking punching the guards, and it's an incredible scene. I remember the first time I saw it was so stunning, and I learned in the commentary that they didn't rehearse the scene with the extras, so all the extras were there, and the look of shock on their faces is really authentic because Cagney was is so over the top here, and they didn't know that was going to be coming. So that's a famous scene. I also like the scene later on when Cagney learns that Edmund O'Brien, playing the policeman who is undercover, and they become great friends. Cagney really likes him. He's a brother to him, and then he learns that he is in fact a police officer. And Cagney has one of those greatest scenes when he learns about that information, and the dialogue is great there. Virginia Mayo was Warner Brothers' female star at the time, and they gave her top billing with Jimmy Cagney and Virginia Mayo equally, above the title. She plays Cagney's wife, but she's quite a character. She is sort of two-timing him with Cagney's rival within the gang, and she's a double dealer to the max. I mean, she just goes with whatever way to win flows all the way up to the end of the movie, whether she's with Cagney or whether she's with the rival, played by Steve Cochran, and I have to mention Margaret Wycherley, I think is name, playing Cagney's mom. She is just terrific. You probably would notice her. You would, if you watch a lot of classic Hollywood movies. I think the commentary says her other most significant role, excuse me, was playing Gary Cooper's mother in Sergeant York. And Virginia Mayo had worked with Raoul Walsh in 1949, the same year as White Heat. She appeared in the Colorado Territory, which I think is one of her best roles. If you've never seen it, it's on the High Sierra Criterion release. Walsh, because Oklahoma Territory is a Western remake of the 1940s gangster movie, a movie that made Humphrey Bogart a star before the Maltese Falcon. And they worked well together. And there's a short interview with her in the supplements where how much she loved working with Jimmy Cagney, because she would go on to work with him again. And Steve Cochran playing the rival within the gang, he's very good as well. He's an actor who's a very good-looking guy, very dark-looking guy. I don't know that he ever have a great role. I know that he went to Italy, and I made movies in Italy, but especially he was the lead role in Michelangelo Antonioni's El Grido, The Outcry, in 1959, with the Lita Valley. And I mentioned Margaret Wycherley, that there's also in this film a documentary style look to it. Now, in the late 1940s, that's what was happening in Hollywood. They were filming, they were going out and filming on location as much as they could. So we get a lot of great locations of LA in circa 1949. The other thing they do here is this is also a police procedural. It's rather dry, it's rather methodical, but it does provide what was at the time cutting edge technology as to how surveillance worked. Now in modern times we look at that and we probably laugh. Look how primitive they were using radio signals and cross referencing where the radio signals were in order to track Cody and his gang on their last heist at the end of the film. But in 1949, this would have really impressed audiences, I believe, and the movie spends a lot of time with it. So Warner Brothers was very up to date as far as this documentary look, even though they were still using what their fast editing approach, their movement that made them famous in the 1930s, especially in their movies with Jimmy Cagney, because for about 10 years he was probably their biggest star. On this is a Warner Brothers release. They actually have a commentary by Dr. Drew Casper from professor at Southern Cal or UCLA. Very good. He's got lots of commentary, lots of useful information to be sure. And then there's a very curious supplement where we get various historians in very short clips. They talk about the influence of white heat, the importance of Jimmy Cagney, and it includes Andrew Saris, which you hardly ever see in supplements. He gives brief comments, and they cut to Martin Scorsese 3 or 4 times, just a couple sentences. I would have loved to hear Martin Scorsese on White Heat at much more length. But anyways, this is a really, if you're a Cagney fan, I suppose you've probably already seen this, but this is a very, very entertaining gangster film. It's just a one of a kind, really. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who listened. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.